Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs? My name's Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me, as always, was Poppin' Ricardo.
What's going on?
I just got a message from Bleacher Report that says that, it's gone. I guess Joe Burrow deleted all of his social media.
Oh, I saw that, yeah. He's probably getting roasted.
1,000% getting roasted, poor guy.
That's probably what it was, yeah.
Favorite quarterbacks in the NFL. I wish he wasn't on the Bengals. Such a fraud organization. Anyway, welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. We got some interesting content to bring you for the rest of the week. Our starts and sits, one of my favorite shows of the week. Hopefully this week when I post a sit or start TikTok,
you go 3 for 3.
Yeah. Well, see, I feel like that's a surefire way not to get made fun of.
Yeah, no, it's opposite. TikTok though is so like this one TikToker that I watch some of his fantasy football stuff. He was a big Travis Etienne guy, right?
I'm a big Travis.
All off season though, Travis Etienne. And obviously Etienne has not lived up to the hype.
Yep. He's
gotten other players right. But people will go to his videos where he gets something right, and all the comments are just, what about ETN, though? And it has, like, all the likes. And they're like, can't trust you anymore. Lost my week because you told me to draft ETN. And it's like, oh, my gosh. You can't get anything wrong.
That is how people are. We are going to be honest with you. We have a show at the end of the season where we talk about things we got wrong fairly often.
I already know there's things... I have like 4 or 5 things that I was horribly wrong about.
Fantasy football is just a game of predictions and analytics. So we are trying to predict as best we can, and no one has the, what do they call it? A Gray's Sports Almanac from Back to the Future to give you the information, even though some people will tell you that they have all the answers.
Right. They'll say that, but they never do.
We don't have all the answers. I'm looking at my fantasy team in our home league trying to figure out the answers. I can't find the answer key.
It's just really about getting more things right than wrong.
Yep.
And having reasoning behind why you have those opinions.
Right. You don't just say, what is it? Fantasy football counselor. I don't know if anybody's heard of him. Don't look him up. It's not worth it. That guy's a clown shoe and a half.
I've seen some of it. It's actually very entertaining, though.
It's comical,
but there's like no reasoning behind anything he says.
He just says the concheapsis is what he calls the rest of the fantasy community. Oh man. Anyway, I don't make fun of people in the fantasy community, by the way. But that's one guy I'm gonna make fun of. He's a clown. Anyway. So, yeah, we're going to do our starts and sits today, try to give you some advice for your lineups heading into week 3 of the fantasy football season. Before we do that, check out our website, fantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcast platforms, please leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, like, and comment down below any questions you may have for us. Are you ready to get started with the starts and sits, Rick?
Yeah, let's do it, bro.
All right, we're going to start with the stats.
Stats.
Number 1, we have Juju Smith-Schuster at the Indianapolis Colts. Rick, why is Juju a start this week?
I think everyone just might have clicked off the video, but before you do, I know he burned you last week. He burned me last week, honestly. But we already know, based off of what we've seen so far in the Patrick Mahomes comments, that it is wide receiver by committee. And I do think long term, I'm very worried about Juju. Mm-hmm. But it kind of helps him for this week if you look at it in those terms, because last week he was not really involved. He only had 3 targets. His snap percentage was lower than MVS. And if they really are doing wide receiver by committee, you would think this week they might want to target Juju more in a game where the Colts defense struggled against Christian Kirk last week, who played a lot of the slot. And Trevor Lawrence kind of lit them up, and it's a banged-up defense. And I think Patrick Mahomes will have a better week this week than he did last week against the Chargers. I think statistically, he was okay. 2 touchdowns, 235 yards. Obviously was fine, good enough to get the win and played well. But I think he could be in line for a bigger week this week against the Colts. And that should all be good things for Juju, who I am nervous about long term. But based on the matchup this week, I think he's a good start, good flex to put in if you have a couple guys that you can't choose from. I think Juju's the call.
Yeah. I mean, Indy typically doesn't give a load ton of fantasy points to the wide receiver position. 25.7 so far this year. But how many fantasy points
did play
Christian Kirk?
Houston week 1, and
how many
Kirk
points
last week
Christian
had,
Kirk had?
25.
Sheesh.
So is that
the Colts had?
Was that including last week? Because I don't.
Yeah, no, it's including last week. Yeah, no, it's. I mean, they're middle of the pack in terms of how many fantasy points they give up to the wide receiver position, but it does seem like a lot go to the main receiver, and I think that obviously the Chiefs are a far, far, far better offense than the Jacksonville Jaguars. And to be honest with you, like Juju will get target share. Like they paid him money. There's only 2 wide receivers on the team really at this point. Like Sky Moore has had 1 target on the season, I think, or 1 catch on the season.
Yeah, he's not really. It's really just Hardman, Juju, and MVS.
It's Hardman, Juju, and MVS, and MVS really doesn't look good at all. He looks normal.
No, he does not. He looks awful.
He looks pretty much like he did in Green Bay. So
who would have guessed?
It's Hardman and Juju, and I think that Juju, like, in order for them to have success, obviously that is involved with throwing it to Travis Kelce, but they got to get it to somebody else, because if he's going to throw it 30+ times in this game,
and Justin Watson too last week had a touchdown. That's not happening again.
No. So I think Juju is a good start this week. I think he has a bounce back week against the Indianapolis Colts. He's on the field for a majority of the game, so he should be fine. I think last week was just an anomaly. So I know it's like it's going to be a tougher matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, but this is a good bounce back game.
I don't even know if I feel like those numbers are a little messed up, because you said they gave him 27.
That's to all wide receivers.
Yeah,
so they could have given
25.
They couldn't have given up 25. Yeah, but the week before they didn't give anything up to Houston.
Marvin Jones had 6. Zay Jones had 5. That's just last week. Brandon Cooks in week 1 against the Colts had, I think, like 15 points. Had an okay week. He had 15.2.
Yeah, but who else exists in Houston?
Well, nobody, but I mean, Kansas City and Houston is a big difference.
Nico Collins is their second wide receiver, and he had 4 points in
week 1. If anything, though, that proves that it is a good matchup, because if they gave up those points to Houston, what are they going to do against Kansas City?
Yeah, so I think the wide receiver 1 of the team that they're playing will be fine. I don't think that there's going to be like 3 wide receivers that end up blowing up in this game. But yeah, so it's not, like I said.
What, you don't think MVS is getting 30 fantasy points?
No, I'll go out on a limb and say that's not going to happen. But yeah, Juju against Indy is a good start. The second guy.
Oh boy, we're already with the Juju take is already pushing it.
I don't know if that's
now,
pushing
here we go
it.
at number 2.
I don't know if that's pushing it, though. Is it?
Well, it's pushing it in the sense of, like, he's not been good this year, but this guy's been even worse.
All right, so Darnell Mooney versus the Houston Texans. Typically, I would say after 2 pretty abysmal performances for the Chicago Bears, in terms of production at the wide receiver position, I would say let's wait on Mooney. But you know what? He's playing Houston. And Houston is bad. Not a good football team.
Houston is bad.
And I think last season we saw Darnell Mooney on a pace of, 160 targets?
Yep.
And so far this year he has 3?
He has 6.
6 targets.
Actually.
Good.
Oh, 5.
He hasn't had a lot of target share. And in the first game, it was a monsoon. And in the second game, the Green Bay Packers kind of just shut down anything that they were doing offensively. So for Darnell Mooney, at some point, he's the most talented weapon they have. Like with the Chiefs, we were just talking about Juju. They at least have Travis Kelce. So if they have no one to throw the ball, they're going to throw it to Travis Kelce. The Bears don't have anyone to throw the ball. We thought it was going to be Cole Kmet. We thought it was going to be Darnell Mooney. They've only thrown it an average of 12 times a game. So I don't know if that's accurate, by the way. 12 times a game. But I'm being close. I'm being melodramatic. But I think this week against the Houston Texans, this is going to be a game where they try to get their offensive passing game going. Against Houston, they're going to try to pass it a little bit more, and I think this is a get-right game. I do think that Darnell Mooney is probably going to get 7 to 10 targets, and I think against Houston it is an easier matchup for him. I wanted to look to see what the fantasy points per game are at the wide receiver position for Houston. Houston gives up 32.3 fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So my argument here is either the Bears are just a calamity and super bad, and Justin Fields sucks and they don't throw the ball at all, and Houston somehow lets this 32.3 points per game thing go away, or the wide receiver position is fine in this game. They target Darnell Mooney. He has a touchdown, and he ends up giving you a good week.
Not worried about Derek Stingley, bro? 3rd overall pick?
No.
Corner?
I mean, he's fabulous.
He's been playing good first 2 games.
He's fabulous. Better than Sauce. But
not true.
But anyway, so yeah, no, I think this will be a week where Mooney has a decent game. I mean, if they give up 32.3 points to the wide receiver position, somebody's got to get the ball, and I don't think it's going to be the randos. I think it's going to be Darnell Mooney. I would be okay with starting him this week.
You did say before the show you were willing to take all the blame if this.
Yes, 1,000%. I'll take all the blame
because this was your decision.
Roast me in the comments.
My only counter to this is Mooney has 1 fantasy point this season. Technically 2, I guess, because he had 0.6. So it adds up to 2. And Justin Fields last week had 11 pass attempts. So it's kind of hard to get fantasy points when your quarterback, if you're a receiver and your quarterback's throwing the ball 11 times. And 6 of those went to running backs, or 5 of those. So it's kind of hard when you throw to the wide receiver group about 4 or 5 times in a game.
Why on earth did they only pass it 11 times?
I don't know. We're going to find out this week because I will say the positive for Mooney is I highly doubt that happens again. I think they're going to have to let it rip a little bit. Throw the ball at least 20 times is the hope.
Yeah.
But dude, if not, if they throw the ball again 16, 17 times and half of that goes to running backs and tight ends, Mooney's droppable. He becomes to the point. And I was all in on Mooney.
I will say
I was all in. But if it happens 3 straight weeks, he's droppable.
Matt Eberflus will get fired by midseason if they don't start passing it more. This is not how you run an offense in the NFL. You can't. Yeah, there are running teams, i.e. Tennessee, Philadelphia. There are running.
Even
Patriots.
them. Philadelphia's not really.
But there are teams that run it, and then there are teams that pass it.
Right.
There are not teams that pass it 15 times a game. That's just a surefire way to lose a football game.
It really is.
So at some point, they're going to have to start passing it. I'm not really sure what's going on, but I think it changes this week against Houston. So I would be okay with Darnell Mooney. If Darnell Mooney poops on himself this week, though, I'm out.
Are you saying I should start Darnell Mooney over Travis Etienne in a league?
Oh,
on my flex?
boy. I don't know. That's a hard one. Because I like Etienne this week, too, against the Chargers. All right, let's talk about the last start of the week, Breese Hall versus Cincinnati. Give us your thoughts, Rick.
Okay, I was a little pleasantly surprised with Breese Hall so far this year because he hasn't really got a ton of work, but he's putting up, average numbers, which is not too bad considering he's really splitting backfield with Michael Carter. And this past week, Michael Carter had more work, but it was clear who was the more talented running back, I think, when both guys were out there. I want to say Michael Carter had like 3 yards a carry, and Breese Hall was at 7. So, and Michael Carter had I think a lot more snap percentage this week, just because the Jets were losing for most of the game and they made that comeback, but they were in a lot of passing situations, and Carter seems to be the more pass catching back than Breese. But against Cincinnati this week, it's a very good matchup.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Tony Pollard. The Cowboys played them last week, right? Yeah, and Pollard had a really good game with 19.8 fantasy points. The Bengals right now are just kind of a mess and struggling. This could also be a relatively high-scoring game. I think both offenses are decent if the Bengals figure it out with their offensive line, and they might. So, could be a relatively high-scoring game. I think Breese Hall also gets more work this week because of how well he played in his limited time.
Yeah.
In week 1, he had a 45% snap percentage, 12 touches. This past week, down to 27% snap percentage, but he hit with 8 touches. But he was really, really efficient and effective with those 8 touches. So I think this week against the Bengals, the coaching staff will give him more work, higher snap percentage. He's not at the point where he's a workhorse by any means, but I think this week starts where he starts to get more work in that offense in a pretty good matchup.
Okay, yeah. I would hope that he starts to split a little bit more evenly with the first couple weeks of the season are weird because I think, backfields that aren't fully determined yet, coaches are still trying to figure out what they'll do in game, and how certain situations play out. The Dolphins are a great example of this too. You have Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert, and Edmonds didn't have the best rushing day in week 1. So they stuck Mostert out to start the game, and then he does okay, and they're just bouncing back and forth between guys. I think it's the same thing for the Jets, where they want to get their second-round pick involved in the game, but they want to see if he actually can provide for them offensively to get a win. I also think that Breese Hall is going to be the pass-catching back. He has 10 targets in 2 games on the season. He only had 1 last week and 27% snap percentage, but I think he's going to be the guy that gets the ball when they're down in games. And if that's the case, then obviously he provides PPR floor in games that the Jets are losing, which is a lot of them. So, and I think this is going to be, Michael Carter's good and he's young, but I think Breese Hall at some point will take over this job as the season goes along. But with that being said, they're playing the Cincinnati Bengals this week. Cincinnati has been struggling. They do have a good offense. Hopefully they can put some points on the Jets so that Breese Hall can get some work. But I would start Breese Hall this week against the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agree.
Let's move on to our sits of the week. And the first one is Tua Tangavailoa.
Here we go.
40 points, 6 touchdowns, 450 plus yards. Lit the field on fire against the Baltimore Ravens.
Dude, he's the QB5 in fantasy through 2 weeks.
I would sit Tua Tangavailoa, and I'm not going to start him with a 10-foot stick.
Yep.
So
basically,
Buffalo is really good at football. So far this year, they've given up 6.8 fantasy points to the quarterback position.
My gosh.
They've been pretty good. And
yeah, that's really good.
This is the first test for the Tua situation in Miami and what this football team is going to look like against a real team and a real defense. Not that Baltimore wasn't, but Buffalo.
Bills are next level.
Bills are next level. They're a Super Bowl contending caliber football team. And right now, Rick has said many times to me that they are the favorites. And coming into the season, they sure friggin' look like the favorites. So this is going to be a real test for Tua. And I think that a lot of people are going to go to the waiver wire. I did this in a league. We lost Trey Lance. So a lot of people are looking for a quarterback. And right now, there's probably a good shot that you can run to the waiver wire and pick up Tua. That's not a bad pickup. I think that rest of season, he provides some upside. But if you picked him up and you want to start him like he's a week-to-week starter and you start him against the Bills, I'm going to be very, very, very disappointed this week. I feel like this is not the week to start Tua. If you want to pick him up and sit him on your bench, that's fine. But against the Buffalo Bills, I would have a hard time believing that he makes it past 15 points this week. I think he's scoring more than that 7 that the Bills have given up on the season on average. But I don't think he is going to. I don't think he's going to make it to 20. The threshold of 20, which is what I like to see out of my quarterback. I think it's going to be a tough week, and I think people are going to pick him up, start him, and then be thoroughly disappointed when he fails miserably. So just be careful with Tua Tangavailoa this week against Buffalo.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that will have the right idea and not start him, but there's going to be also a lot of people that are going to ride the wave. They're going to be like, I don't care. He's playing Buffalo. He had 46 points this week. He's got Tyreek Hill. Let's go. Let's start him every week.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's there yet. That was a fantastic week, but we got to see it for multiple weeks. And it's not just that. It's the fact that he's playing Buffalo, like you said. I mean, they're the number one defense right now in the NFL for fantasy purposes, and they're probably a top 5 defense in the league in general. It's going to be a very tough matchup. It's the hardest team he's played against. That pass rush is going to be crazy. And what are the odds that he goes out and throws 6 touchdowns 2 games in a row? Obviously, definitely not. But even like 2 really, really good games in a row, it's going to be hard for him to kind of live up to the expectations, I think, of that against Buffalo, because he could have like a decent week for him. Like, let's say he gets like 2 touchdowns and throws 1 interception and 250 yards. It's like an average week, right? I mean, that's like 19, 18 fantasy points in a 5-point touchdown league. So in most leagues, 4-point touchdown, it's like 17, 16 points. And it's not really gonna do anything for you. Needle, right? And that's what I think it will most likely happen against the Bills. And historically against the Bills, Tua has been very, very bad. Obviously, he's got Tyreek Hill now, Mike McDaniel, but I'm still not starting him against the Bills.
I was just about to bring that up. Against Buffalo in his rookie season, in the one game that he started against them, he had 19 fantasy points, which is not bad. Threw it 58 times.
That's wild.
He had 361 yards, 1 touchdown, and a total of 3, count them, 3 interceptions. He played literally 12% of the snaps in week 2 last year against Buffalo, so I don't count that game. And then he started another game in week 8 against Buffalo, 205 yards, 1 interception, no touchdowns in that game, 16 fantasy points. He did have a rushing touchdown in that game, which got him up to 16. So, and he's not particularly a rushing quarterback. So, without that, it puts him at 10. I just don't think that there's fantasy upside for him in this Buffalo game. And I think the other thing that we need to mention too is that Tua is one of those quarterbacks that has to score a lot of touchdowns and has to get a large amount of yardage in order to have success in fantasy football, because he doesn't rush. He has 3 rushes on the season for 1 yard. So
worse than Mac Jones.
I know. So he's not going to be a rushing, he's not going to provide any rushing upside, which means that he's more than likely a guy that is just not startable in certain weeks, like against Buffalo. I told this to Rick prior, just talking about real football, but in the Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay systems, sometimes mediocre quarterbacks have a lot of success. And one guy that I tagged back to was Jimmy Garoppolo. Back in his first season with I think it was 2019 with the San Francisco 49ers, he had a game where he scored 35 fantasy points. He had 424 yards and 4 touchdowns. He actually did that 3 times in that season. So there are going to be moments where Tua is startable and he's good. And then there are weeks where he's not startable. And I think this would be a week where he's not startable. You picked him up. You're excited. That's great. but temper the excitement because whenever there's a really big game for a player, there's usually a valley game where you gotta go
come back down to earth. That feels like it's This feels like it's a comeback down to earth week. Tua.
So sit Tua. Let's move on to was it the final guy? No,
I think we still got two.
We still got two more sits. Okay, my brain said that. All running backs, all Rams running backs versus Arizona. Arizona typically has a good run defense, and we also have no idea what's going on with this backfield. The Cam Akers came out this week, got a lot of snaps, got a lot of work, and he physically split snaps with Darrell Henderson. Henderson had 10 points. I think Cam Akers had 8. Is that correct?
Yeah.
In PPR. So 18 points between the two running backs. This week they're going up against the Arizona Cardinals, who, like I said, have been relatively tough in the past against the running game. This year they have given up decent amounts of fantasy points to the running back position, but they've also had some really, really, really atrocious.
They've been losing by a lot in both games.
Yeah, so I would say Arizona, even if they're middle of the pack, only gives up about 18 fantasy points, 17 fantasy points a game to the running back position. And
it's 9 for each guy.
Yeah, it's 9 for each guy. So if you have either one of these guys, I'm not really ready to run out and start either one of these running backs against the Arizona Cardinals. If it's like a really, really healthy, good week, and you have either one of them, they're playing friggin'. Was it like, hold on a second, I'm trying to look at some stats. They are starting against like the Detroit Lions, then yeah, that might be a week where you're like, okay, I can start either one of these guys, but this week's not a week to do that. So
yeah, I'm glad I got rid of the only Akers share that I had because it's a mess.
Yeah.
And you don't know what McVay's going to do week to week, I feel like, from this point on. Maybe one of these guys does have a big week this week against Arizona. Maybe Henderson gets 16 or Cam Akers gets 16, but you don't know which guy it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't trust how they're going to use either guy. I don't know how they're going to use either guy. If they split, then it's probably going to be what they did this week, which is 10 and 8 fantasy points. So no matter the outcome, it's unlikely that you're gonna get the guy right. So if I have one of these guys, I'm 100% sitting them. If I had to guess, I don't even know. I mean, Henderson still had the higher snap percentage, but Akers had more touches. But Akers was also very inefficient with his touches. So it's just one of those situations where I truly don't know what's going on in that backfield. And usually when that happens, I kind of want to stay away from it. So
yeah.
I don't love it. And Arizona, surprisingly, even though their defense hasn't been good this year whatsoever, but it was partly because of the week 1 game against the Chiefs. I guess they've been pretty decent against running backs, so that just makes it even more so that I don't want to play either of these guys. So it's pretty easy one for me that I'm not starting either one of these guys.
Yeah. The final sit of the week is Alanizard at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This one's really easy. Tampa Bay, one of the best defenses in the NFL. Somehow the freaking Buccaneers lost, even though Tom Brady couldn't throw a bowling ball in the ocean.
Well, his touchdown pass was to Brashad Perriman.
That was pretty good. That was a bowling ball in the ocean.
And Scotty Miller was his other receiving option.
Yeah, so Tampa, I did say sit Tom Brady last week, but Tampa Bay gives up 9 points to the running back position, which is 3rd in the NFL so far this year.
Running back?
Oh God, I'm sorry.
Receiver.
Yeah, I meant to say receiver. They give up. I was reading the complete wrong statistics. Tampa Bay Buccaneers give up 24 fantasy points to the wide receiver position, which ranks 9th in the NFL. Or ninth in points given up, I should say. No. 9th in.
Is it good or bad?
It's good. It's good.
Okay,
that's good things. It's always so confusing when I read the stat.
It's the 9th.
They give up the 9th fewest points.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
To the wide receiver position. Alanizard came in last week, and I think there was a lot of people anticipating that he would get a little bit more run in the game, and Lazard ended up only with a few targets, and he came down with a touchdown, which is good, but he had 3 targets, 2 catches, 13 yards, and a touchdown. in the game against the Chicago Bears. I don't know what this Green Bay Packers passing attack is really going to look like on a week-to-week basis, and I really don't want to trust Lazard.
Wide receiver by committee.
Wide receiver by committee part 2 here, except Mahomes seems to know how to do it a little bit better than Rodgers. But going up against Tampa, when we don't even know who the receiver really is going to be in Green Bay, it's clear that Rodgers Lazard was stuck to Rodgers' hip the whole game. I do think Lazard's going to end up being the guy at some point in the season, but it's not going to start this week against Tampa.
Yeah, I agree. And dude, looking at the stats from the Packers-Bears game on Sunday just makes it even more gross for me wanting to start Alanizard and why I don't think you should. I think Lazard had 3 targets, which was tied for second on the receiving core in targets, with Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, and Randall Cobb. They all had 3 targets, and Sammy Watkins had 4. So between 5 wide receivers, they all had 3 and 4 targets. It was so gross. And I think Robert Tonyan had 4 targets as well, something like that. 3 or 4 targets.
Yeah.
So between basically he had 2 targets. So between basically their whole wide receiver core, they all had 2 to 4 targets. So disgusting. Everybody got a look. Nobody got more than 4 targets other than I think maybe Aaron Jones. Who he only had 3 targets too. So it was just a very disgusting offense to watch for fantasy purposes, unless you had Aaron Jones.
Yeah.
And Lazard did have those 9 fantasy points, but it was because he caught the touchdown. He only had 3 targets. I'm not starting him against Tampa, against a really, really good defense that played really well against the Saints, even though Winston was banged up. But I would be nervous about Lazard. If he goes out this week, gets 10 targets and a touchdown, and gets 20 fantasy points and proves us wrong, then I think long-term feel a lot better about Lazard. But I'm kind of nervous about him long-term. I do think if I had to guess, he's going to be the guy, because it's just Rodgers seems to like the veteran players, and of the veteran guys, I think he's got the best connection with him. But I am a little nervous on how the Packers spread the ball out in week 2.
Yep. All right, there you go. Starts and sits. Week 3 in the books. We got one more week 3 episode left. Week 3 comes along once a year.
It does.
And now it's almost
crazy
over.
way of looking at it.
Tomorrow we got buys and sells. We'll get that to you. Use these starts and sits for this week. See you later, guys.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.